All right. Hello, everyone. We are going to be getting started in just a moment. Sorry, I've got my Zoom back over here. I'm trying to arrange everything on my screen. So if I turn around and look behind me, that's why. If you want to go ahead and in the chat, just let me know. Say hi, let me know where you're joining from and what your role is. That would be great. And I just want to make sure that everybody can, in fact, hear me. Just because Zoom sometimes does not like my mic. So if people could give me a thumbs up to let me know that everyone can hear me. Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is going to be a very, very busy day to spill the tea on Gen Z as your future association members and employees. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. And after today's session, we're going to email a link to each of you, or you can access it anytime on our website. Just go to omnipress.com and under resources, you'll see a link to our webinars. And if you have any questions, any comments throughout the course of this webinar, you can go ahead and just type it in the chat. Okay. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with Omnipress, here's a very quick 60-second overview of who we are and what we do. So we were founded over 40 years ago to help associations and other organizations collect, produce, and distribute their educational content for conferences, instructor-led training programs, and member publications. So our portfolio of products and services includes our Catalyst abstract and speaker management software, digital conference content and event schedule, a mobile event app, printed materials, online publications, and print and fulfillment services. Now, a little bit about who I am and why I'm giving this presentation. I'm the director of marketing here at Omnipress. I've had over 10 years working with associations, was also the former president of my local chapter of the American Marketing Association, which was really fun because we were a group of marketers trying to learn how to run an association. And I wish I knew then a lot of what I've come to learn now in terms of what it takes to actually run an association. I'm also the mom of two young adults, two Gen Zs. And I started doing a lot of reading and research, as well as pulling together my own informal observations, conversations with parents, with other marketers, other business leaders, really in my quest to better understand this new generation that's coming into the workforce and better understand the world from their perspective, so that I can be a better marketer, a better manager and team leader, and also a better parent. And thus how this presentation came about. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to walk through some key things to know about Gen Z and really translate this into what they need and want from you, both as an association member and as an employer. And again, go ahead and share your thoughts and comments at any point in the chat. What you're going to see here is information that's been organized, vetted, compiled from multiple sources of research and articles and observations, anecdotes from Gen Zers, from their parents, from professors, from bosses, from teachers. I kind of looked at where everything aligned and filtered through kind of what was most important for your day-to-day, just because there's a lot of different studies and research and articles out there that don't necessarily pertain to what we're going to talk about today. I'll probably also throw in a few of my own personal stories just to sort of illustrate some of these points. And I want to start the conversation with a couple of key things. Number one, are these going to be somewhat sweeping generalizations? Absolutely. Fully understand and acknowledge that everyone is unique, and youth definitely plays a factor right now. In fact, it's funny because when I started putting this presentation together, which I have given in the past at an AMCI event, since then, the Pew Research Center issued sort of a statement of caution about overgeneralizing and oversimplifying generations. And Pew is actually going to be changing their approach to really compare generations at similar stages of life. So to kind of quote what Pew says, they say that the question isn't whether young adults today are different from older adults today. The question is whether young adults today are different from young adults at some specific point in the past. There's definitely things happening that Gen Z, quite frankly, that are happening to all of us just because of the state of the world we live in today. You know, they're not the only ones who were affected by the pandemic or who are concerned about the environment, right? So moving forward, Pew is going to move away from some of these standard sort of generational labels when they're not appropriate, and instead really look at them in relation to the research question that's being studied. And they're also looking at narrowing the cohorts because they find that they're kind of using too wide a swath of demographics to be looking at. So that's kind of the context that we're going to talk about this in, is how is Gen Z as young adults today different from somewhat generations that exist today, but also when those generations were young adults themselves. There are some key things that are happening in the world that are really affecting the outlook this generation has and how they behave and how they communicate and what they expect. Just so you know, too, we're not going to tell you to throw everything out that you do right now for programming, for marketing, for promotion, for events, because at some point, we can't fully adapt to what a younger generation needs and expects, because some of that is due a little bit to a lack of experience and naivety. But we can at least be aware of these expectations and what's driving them so that we can meet them in the middle. And so that we can more effectively work with and mentor them. One thing I did forget to mention, sorry, at the beginning of this webinar is that live captions are available for those that need them. If you go into your Zoom toolbar, there'll be 3 dots with a more on them. And if you look at that, there is an option for captions. So if you turn that on, we do have live captions going right now so that you can see those if you need those. Okay, moving on. So who is Gen Z as they are defined by Pew right now? So they were born between 1997 and 2012. They're about the ages of 12 to 26. So the older side of them have already graduated college and entered the workforce. They do comprise 20% of the US population and 26% of the global population, and they are projected to be 30% of the workforce already by 2030. So it's going to be happening fast. They are relatively large. They're not as large as the millennials, definitely bigger than my generation, Gen X. So they're going to have a big impact pretty quickly in the workforce here. So what are some of the characteristics of this, again, this population of young adults compared to other groups today and compared to when those groups were young adults themselves? What's changed in the world that's having an impact? The first thing to note is that they are the most racially and ethnically diverse generation to date. Almost half are minorities, and this compares to 22% of boomers. 52% identify as white, and that's compared to 61% of just the generation before them. And all speculation is that this is going to be the last generation that is predominantly white. So what does that mean for you as an association or as an organization. One thing to think about is how developed are your DE, I, and A strategies right now, your diversity, inclusion, equity, and accessibility strategies. I know there is a lot of talk about that. I can't open up Associations Now's newsletter without an article in this at least a couple times a week. Definitely something to be looking at and moving forward. Think about, is diversity being embraced in your organization right now? And if so, how? And don't just think about this in terms of like race and ethnicity, but thinking about how you're pulling in diverse thoughts and ideas and viewpoints so that you're getting to hear a lot of different voices. And of course, we don't want to forget about accessibility and neurodiversity, which is a topic that's just finally being discussed, particularly in the event space, which I am very happy to hear as the mom of an autistic Gen Z. There's going to be a lot to talk about there. Okay, moving on. They are the first mobile natives. Now, millennials were spoken about as being the first digital natives, but these guys are really the first ones that have grown up with everything mobile. So looking worldwide, nearly all of them own a smartphone. And they got this phone at the age of 12 versus millennials who got their first phone at 17. So they've started really surfing social media and other platforms pretty early on. They do everything on their phones. I had to painstakingly watch my daughter fill out a job application on her phone of all things, which she did, and it was great, but not the experience I would have chosen. Because they do have constant access to information 24/7, they really are the first generation that is active and available for almost 24 hours a day. It does affect their views, their information gathering habits, and as we'll learn in a little bit, their mental health. Because if you think about it, we're probably all guilty of being on our phones a little too much, and they've been doing so before their brains were fully developed. So the question becomes, what impact is this going to have versus those of us who didn't have access to a smartphone until some of us are late 20s, early 30s, because they didn't exist until then. The other thing to know is that I know in some of our content, we've been talking a lot about associations needing to make sure their educational content is discoverable on search engines like Google, so that your future members can find you when they have a problem or they're looking for answers or they're looking for resources. And now that conversation is actually shifting to other platforms as well. This was actually information that was published by Google themselves, that TikTok has surpassed Google as a go-to search engine for this demographic. So when they've got a question, when they're looking for resources, when they're trying to find how to do something, they're turning to TikTok before they're turning to Google. And Instagram too is in there as well. And according to Google themselves, about 50% of them looked at TikTok or Instagram instead of Google. So not before Google, but instead of Google. So that is something really important to think about as you're putting together your social media strategy. The other thing to note is, speaking of their social media strategy, their habits are different than their predecessors. YouTube, amongst all populations, is the second most popular search engine behind Google when we look at sort of the general adult population. YouTube reaches more US adults ages 18 to 34 than any cable network. And I can absolutely attest to this. My son consumes content on YouTube as though he were sitting in front of the television. And they're mostly watching on mobile. In a Think with Google survey, 80% of Gen Z has said that YouTube has helped them become more knowledgeable about something. And 68% said YouTube helped them improve or gain skills. Now let's think about that a second. What is it that associations do? What is one of the main things you do to really push forward your mission? Education, upskilling, reskilling, right? You guys, that's one of your values, is to really provide that educational content. So clearly you've got some competition out there when it comes to trying to attract these folks. And it's absolutely true. I mean, my son taught himself how to animate watching YouTube. My daughter was auditioning for a show. She hadn't tap danced since she was like 6. She wanted to get one of the bigger parts. She watched YouTube to reteach herself how to tap dance. So it's definitely something they are used to doing. Now, this is a really interesting chart. So if you look at this, what social media platforms do US Gen Z adults use the most? And at the top, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. What social media channels does your organization tend to use the most? I know we're still somewhat guilty of relying a lot on LinkedIn and things like that. And obviously this slide was created before this week's rebrand of Twitter. But, you know, is your association using some of these top social media channels to really connect with prospective members? So some points to ponder here. First of all, are your tools, are your channels mobile friendly? So of course, your website, think about your e-learning system, think about your member portal, you know, online publications, anything you put out there for folks to interact with and touch. Are those mobile friendly? Think about what social media channels your organization uses. Also, as both an employer and as a member-based organization, when you're thinking about recruitment in either of those contexts, do you use social to help with that recruitment? Think about how well does your association compete with some of those free and online resources that are out there for information, for training, for peer connections. I'm not sure if you guys can hear that, but we're by the airport, and so the fighter jets are going by. It's a little loud on my end. But also think about, where do people go to get information and previews of your programs and your other member benefits? If it's only on your website, they are probably not getting there and they're probably not seeing it. You have to use some of these other social media channels really as sort of that portal to be in their face when they're looking for resources, and then to funnel them to your website. Another thing to know about Gen Z, and this should come as no surprise, their mental health is not good. I would argue for a lot of us, mental health is not always great just because of how much is going on right now, right? But compared to relative to other populations, it's definitely more pronounced in this younger generation. 90% state that they've experienced mental health concerns. They are 3 times more likely to deal with suicidal thoughts, depression, and addiction than boomers. And at least 50% of them are being treated for anxiety and depression, which is more than any other generation. Now, part of that is because they're a lot more open to this. It's a lot more accepted to seek treatment, to talk to somebody, to bring this to the forefront, to be transparent about it. I think about my parents. I still don't think they would ever really talk about this. And when you think about their mental health concerns, can you really blame them? You know, I think about my son had his first active shooter drill in preschool, and he came home saying, you know, mommy, today we got to play a hiding game. I mean, what does that do to somebody, right? So it's important to really take stock in some of your own personal biases, right? I've read that Gen X, again, my generation, is called the generation of grit. And we probably get some of that from our boomer parents. I can be a little guilty of the whole shut up and drink some water kind of attitude, but that's not how it works anymore. And that doesn't mean this group doesn't want to work hard and get results. They just might need a little more flexibility in how they do it. So looking ahead in terms of things to think about, what are some of your own personal biases toward mental health? As an employer, how does your organization prioritize self-care and wellness or flexibility? If someone needs to maybe alter their work hours or what they consider a work day just a bit, is that okay? Big question is, do you yourself model this behavior? I've been with organizations before that have said that, yep, flexibility is great and what have you, or, yes, self-care. And then I'm getting emails from my boss at, 2 a.m. So make sure you're modeling that behavior. And then thinking about your association benefits. Does your association have programs that support mental health in its respective industry? Obviously, every industry can have its own set of stressors, its own set of challenges that people are dealing with. So is that something that you can support in your programming? Another thing to know about this generation is that they very much pay attention to social causes. 70% of Gen Zs are stated to be involved in a social or political cause. Now, what the definition of involvement is varies greatly. It can be as little as volunteering for a few hours to really leading the charge, leading a committee, leading an initiative. And just 20% say that they would work for a company that doesn't share their values. Now, part of the reason for this is because they actually have the whole world available to them at their fingertips at all times. So they are very much aware of not just their own little world, but what's happening around them in a way that I think those of us who are older did not have access to when we were younger. But the good news is, as an association, you absolutely have an advantage here, don't you? That's your whole thing. Your mission is to help advance industries. And if you can connect the dots in terms of how you tell this story, you could really, really use that to connect with people. I've got a great story about this. We've got some folks at our own organization that are brilliant at this. So one of our services is print and fulfillment of educational materials for training courses. Whenever we have a new hire, particularly in our production and warehouse areas, we've got folks at our organization, and one person in particular, who makes sure that he walks through the warehouse with these folks and actually shows them some of the materials on the shelf and discusses what they're for and how they're used. Areas like mental health, cybersecurity, medical training, so that they understand that day in and day out, they're not just printing books, they're not just stuffing boxes, but that these tasks really matter and their little piece does make an impact in the bigger picture. And that has really helped, I think, tremendously. So, some things for you to think about. Can you do a better job telling your association's story and how your work has a positive impact on society? And can you use this to really drive some of that member engagement? But then taking that a step further, how well do you connect the dots on how their specific membership and their specific involvement helps contribute to this impact? And switching roles for just a second, if you're also looking to attract folks as employees, what about their role as an employee? What is it about what they do day to day that really helps drive this mission? This is not something that can just be implied. It absolutely has to be spelled out for folks. All right. Another thing with this organization is that money does matter. Now, I know that millennials got a lot of flack for, supposedly being very materialistic. Whether that's true or not, I'm not necessarily going to debate that here. But it is important to note that, yes, they want to make a difference. Yes, they want to feel heard. Yes, they want that work-life balance and that flexibility. But economic considerations are really the primary driver of employment decisions among this group. There was a study where they surveyed college seniors that were about to graduate in terms of what were their priorities when they were job searching. And 74% are prioritizing things like job stability. 73% say the current economic environment makes it challenging to save. I mean, this is why you're seeing folks who, aren't buying houses, who's got the down payment for one, right? So they're opting to rent. And 42% have a side hustle to make ends meet. So they are very much motivated by money because it is very much a practicality. So think about, as an association, how well do you connect the dots between your membership and your programs and how they help that member achieve financial growth and stability? We join associations to continue to build our skills, to continue to maintain our skills, to help us, climb that ladder, maybe to meet people that can help us grow in our career, to help mentor us, to help give us opportunities. So you are in a great, great position, but you have to spell it out for them. Associations are no longer the default that maybe they once were once upon a time, just because there are so many other resources out there, so many other places for them to connect, so many other places for them to get information, to get education. So how do you pull that together for them so that they think about your association? Whereas, it used to be just something older generations, you just did. You got into a certain industry and you joined the association. That's not necessarily the case anymore. Switching the role just a little bit, as an employer, great way to add some extra perks and benefits, right? Do you offer financial literacy, wealth management, or other related services as perks for your employees? And also, as an employer, similar to the association side, do you provide a clear and transparent path to financial growth within your organization? Because that is going to be the key to helping retain them. Now, this one is my favorite. And it was part of what kind of got me interested in this whole topic to begin with. I'm going to wait for the jets for a second. So this group very much challenges management norms. So thinking about them sort of as employees for a moment. Here's why. So in the classroom, they've had a voice in their own learning, right? We went from a time where it was very much, you sit at a desk, the teacher's at the front of the classroom, they're giving you the lesson. A lot of times it's a lot of memorization. They tell you what it is, you take it in, to this more personalized learning model. We actually wrote an article about this that's on our blog at omnipress.com that looks at how the K through 12 classroom has changed and how that might impact training programs moving forward. And it's really about them having a voice in how they choose to learn based on how they know they learn best or what they need. So they've already started in this point of sort of self-advocacy, which is something they're very used to doing and very comfortable with now. They also communicate differently. Growing up in a world where you're texting people and kind of communicating in shorthand, I I mean, my daughter gets confused when I call her. She thinks something's wrong when I decide to pick up the phone and call instead of text, because she's used to texting. She's used to snapping. I'll never forget. She asked me a question. I sent her a text just out of pure habit. I ended it with a period. I immediately got a call with the question of, why are you mad at me? Because the period is aggressive. When they're sending Snapchats, trying to decipher that sort of hidden language. If you snap a picture of your forehead and send it to somebody, it means that you're disinterested in them, as opposed to snapping a picture of your entire face. So they've got this whole hidden language. So really getting them to communicate the way we're used to can very much be sort of a point of conflict. Things like texting, it lacks social cues like facial expressions, like tone of voice. So there can be more opportunity to misinterpret intent, which can also cause conflict. And speaking of conflict, they don't tend to deal with conflict as well, right? They're used to being able to just ghost people. So having to actually confront someone head on is not a soft skill they've really had an opportunity to build. Speaking of soft skills, a lot of folks have entered the workforce during the pandemic or moving forward, as remote and hybrid work is more of the norm. It's becoming harder to develop these soft skills. I know I personally learned a ton as I was coming up in my career, just by watching my more seasoned superiors. How are you handling this conversation with someone? How are you handling the situation with a client? How are you going to position this? How do you handle yourself in the office? There's a lot that comes through just through basic observation. And if they're not in the office to observe these things or to be told these things, how are they going to learn them? So they may have to be taught some of the unwritten rules of the workplace, right? How to interact with each other, what to wear. Don't just walk into somebody's office and immediately start talking at them if you can see they're in the middle of something. Things like that. And this one is really, really interesting. They don't always recognize that traditional top-down hierarchy, right? Older generations have come from a standpoint of be seen, not heard, right? That is not the case. As I said before, this generation is very, very comfortable with self-advocacy. And even though they might not be as seasoned, they may fully acknowledge that they've got a lot to learn, but they're coming into it feeling like their experiences that they've had are equally relevant. They know they have a better handle on mobile technology. And it's funny, I specifically emphasize the mobile technology because I got in a conversation with someone about this not that long ago, where argument of are they actually more tech savvy or not? It depends. A lot of them are a lot more mobile savvy, right? And they can crank out a video on their mobile phone, no problem, things like that. But when it comes to some of the traditional tech, like using Excel, using Word, things that are done on sort of a traditional computer or laptop, this person that I was discussing this with as a manager said that he finds that a lot of these guys don't know how to do a lot of those basic things that we, sort of grew up doing with computers because it's all on the phone. So those are some other skills. Don't necessarily take for granted that they're going to have full command of some of the traditional tools we're used to using. But the bottom line is, they know that they're experiencing the world in a way that we never did and never had to. And they're using that as leverage, right? They don't want to bide their time until, for advancement. They're looking for opportunities to have an impact now and to have their voice be heard now. There's a really interesting quote that I came across when I was doing some of this research that says, we are no longer at a point where younger people need to adapt to an older way of living, the way we used to have to do. And it's really funny because what spurred me on this whole thing, and here's a little kind of personal tale about it, is that, my husband and I would continually get told by our daughter what she needs from us as parents. And the first time this happened, we were like, wait a minute, wait, we're the parents. You're not supposed to tell us this. We're supposed to tell you what you're supposed to do. But at the same time, we couldn't really argue with her because she was making some really, really interesting and valid points. What she told us really made sense. And at the end of the day, it was really about how we communicate better together. And it ultimately did help us be better parents, but it definitely stretched us outside of our comfort zone. So I think you're going to continue to see these types of behaviors from younger members who are not afraid to speak up and say, hey, I know you do it this way, but this is what I need. Or even as employees, just something to be ready to see and to deal with, because it is different. But at the end of the day, I feel like it does achieve a really good result. So it'll be interesting if anybody's come across that. I'd love to hear about that in the chat. So some things to think about. Does your association now, or can they, provide a lot of soft skills coaching and training and education as part of its programming? How much of your programming focuses on some of those soft skills as opposed to sort of the hard skills you need really to be able to do your job? That's something to think about. Think about what types of leadership opportunities or leadership skills development you can offer your younger members. Do they have to wait until they are a more accomplished, seasoned professional to be able to take on some leadership roles? Or is there a way to do so within specific committees, within specific initiatives? Because there is a lot for them to contribute, and they're going to want to. And thinking about flipping this a little bit and thinking about as an employer, are you ready to invest time in mentoring and some of that soft skills coaching? And are you ready to maybe rethink your leadership style a little bit? Are you going to be open to some of this dialogue you might be having with, younger employees that maybe you're not used to having, because there used to be sort of this top-down hierarchy that is going away, quite frankly. Okay. So that is everything about Gen Z that I wanted to present to you today. But speaking a little bit about connecting the dots. So what does this all mean? I wanted to leave you with some things to really think about as you're developing your own strategies. So the biggest thing, is there an opportunity to really think about how and where you tell your association's story? So how do you communicate that mission and impact beyond the mission statement that is on your website? How do you really show that in action? And how do you make sure that your members know how they're contributing to that as well, or your employees? How you talk about your member benefits and your programs and the community that you provide to them. And whose voice are you using as you're telling some of these stories? Is it just yours, or can you pull in their voice into this as well? Also think about, are there opportunities to really take a look at your educational programs and how they support young professionals? So really pulling in some of those leadership opportunities for them, some of that soft skills training and mental health support. Also think about how you bring members together for professional and social connections, even outside the annual conference. Can you create some community cohorts that meet more frequently, even virtually? Can you bring them together both as mentees, but also give them opportunities to mentor others? I think that just because I'm older, just because I'm more seasoned, doesn't mean that I don't have something to learn from anybody, including people who have less experience than I do. I think there's definitely a two-way street in terms of being able to teach each other there. And does it have to be an all or nothing, right? So people come to your conference and, they have to sort of figure out who are they going to connect with. And it could be really intimidating if they're new and they don't really know anybody. So, is there an opportunity for sort of think about it as like a Tinder for members, right? Let them find people who have similar roles and interests and be able to start connecting with them kind of on their own terms. I think of it as like, my daughter picking, a roommate at college. They have all kinds of like on social media and other ways to see who else is in your graduating class and kind of start to get to know each other on social if you don't want to go room with somebody you already know, and kind of pairing up that way. And I think that's a model that colleges are using today that associations could probably use too, to help form some of those communities and also to help incentivize people to come to the conferences. I think it'd be a lot less intimidating to come to a giant conference if you felt like you were coming there already knowing some people. Also a good opportunity to think about your diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, as we talked about before. And are you giving young professionals a chance to help shape them? And then do these initiatives also include accessibility as well as neurodiversity? And then also, it's a good time to stop and take a good look and think about your culture as a manager and as an organization who employs people, right? So are you providing those professional growth and leadership opportunities, especially early on? Think about your own leadership style and how you communicate, and really think about what you think success and hard work looks like today. What's your vision and definition of that? And does that necessarily align with maybe how that definition is changing a little bit? If I decide to log on at 6 a.m, but log off at 1 or 2 and get everything done I need to get done, is that okay? Is that frowned upon just because those hours work better for me? Or does it have to be 8 to 5? And does that even really mean that someone is working harder or is successful? It's very interesting. It's gonna challenge some things that I think that we are used to. At the same time, though, I do want to give a caveat that, again, it doesn't mean we have to completely upend everything we're used to and everything we've done. I think there is room to meet in the middle, and we really have to mentor folks and guide folks, because there is something about the traditional way of doing things that does need to maintain at least a little bit to help have some of that structure, I guess, right? That helps to make things happen. So it doesn't mean you have to throw everything out completely, but you do have to start being a little more flexible in how you're thinking about things and getting a little bit more creative about how you do things. I guess that would be kind of the biggest takeaway I would have from this. So that is everything we had today. I hope you're able to walk away with some ideas, some thoughts, some things to ponder. If you do have any notes or anything you want to discuss, feel free to go ahead and put it in the chat. Otherwise, that is everything for today. Oops, I went one too far. And you can always reach me and find me and visit our website at omnipress.com. Thanks so much, everyone. It was really, really great to chat with you. today and to share this information. And I hope we can find ways to keep the discussion going. Thanks.